Welcome to Australia's Payments Future. My name's Katrina Stewart from Australian Payments Plus. And thank you all for joining us today. And we're here to talk about faster, more efficient superannuation payments. I'd like to just start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands on which we're meeting today. We're coming to you from Sydney, the lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and like to pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. I'm joined today by my colleague Marnie Ryan, who's Head of Innovation and Enablement at Australian Payments Plus, and probably a very familiar face to a number of you, as she's been very closely involved in the NPP journey for a number of years. And we're delighted to welcome two special guests with us today. Firstly, Grant Doherty, who's the Managing Director of Q-Valent at Westpac. And with over 35 years in the industry, Grant has been instrumental in developing a range of digital receivables and payables products for Westpac's corporate clients. Grant's played a pivotal role in creating the Quick Super clearinghouse and gateway offerings from scratch, and was a key contributor to the successful SuperStream transition. And we're also joined by Gai Morris, who has over 25 years of experience as a senior HR professional across financial services, professional services and the public sector. Gai is a partner based in Marsh McLennan's Melbourne office and was most recently Mercer's Chief People and Culture Officer before joining Mercer's client-facing team as a strategic client executive. Gai has held a number of senior HR leadership roles with KPMG, ANZ Banking Group and the Department of Justice. Welcome, Grant and Gai. It's so lovely to have you with us today.
Pleasure.
So we just wanted to recap briefly on Australian Payments Plus. For those of you maybe who didn't join us for our first webinar, AP Plus was created when Australia's domestic payments companies, BPay, EFTPOS and NPP Australia, came together in 2022 to shape the future of payments for Australia. And we just wanted to give you a bit of an update on the NPP story to date. So we continue to see strong growth and take-up of the NPP. We did about 1.6 billion transactions in 2024, which was close to about 20% year-on-year growth. Continue to see growth in our accounts reachable as well, now at 114 million accounts that can make and receive NPP payments, and continue to see growth in the use of PayID, over 25 million PayIDs now registered, and monthly growth in our transactions as well. So we wanted to touch on superannuation payments and the NPP. So handing over to you, Marnie, to talk us through a little bit more about that.
Thanks, Katrina. Many of you may have been involved in our conversations that we've been having probably since about 2018 after the NPP first launched. We've been active in conversations with not only the superannuation industry but also the ATO as well. And we, in 2020, stood up our own superannuation working group and have been involved in a number of conversations over the years with ATO and more recently with the Payday Super working group as well. We also have a payments working group that we've established with DSPANs, where we've started looking at a number of things around superannuation issues and what are the key call-outs that we need to address as we start moving to the NPP or look to actually build on what we've been doing or those in the market have been doing already. We've seen, and as we've walked through those sort of workshops and more detailed deep dives, we've started to understand the end-to-end journey that a payment or a superannuation message would take. And we know that these two things need to work in collaboration. We know that those things that are called out here on the screen, which are things like verification, exception processing, making sure that the return of the funds is actually captured, also the timeliness of returns and the confirmation of the payment status are really critical to the flow, but also really critical to how payments are received and the contribution messages are actually processed. If we think about how the NPP can help with those issues and that sort of process, we know that there are a number of things that the NPP enables. Standardising real-time superannuation payments 24/7 means that there's more available time to actually process those superannuation payments, those critical payments, and they're very reliant on some time-bound processing as well. We know that there's an ability to carry relevant superannuation data. Now that's really important, and that's been one of our main focus over the last couple of years, ensuring that we get the reconcilable information, which is usually a PRN and the value, straight through end to end. And we know that there's been some challenges with that, and that's part of the work that we're currently doing with not only industry but the ATO as we look to payday super. Account and payee validation, not only through the Pay ID product that we have, but also upcoming products like confirmation of payee. Those are really important in terms of how we actually not only validate who is being paid in collaboration with the fund validation service, but also payouts as well. So are you paying your superannuation to the right people? Are there, extra validation pieces that we can add into that process? One of the key things, and it comes back to the reconciliation as well, is the isolation of an individual payment where there's issues. And when we think about those returns and refunds, or even just not being able to match the contribution, that's where we see isolating individual payments to be real enablers on how that successful processing will actually happen. The NPP is built on making sure that we have status notifications in the legs of the journey of the payment, and that's really important in providing certainty and certainty that the funds are being actually allocated. For us, that's incredibly important, but we know that that's coming out in some of the conversations that we've been having with industry as well. Our key product in terms of payment initiation is Pay2 and the ability to be able to initiate payments and also migrate direct debits as we start to look to the future of payments and the imminent closure, 2030, of our target date for BECS closure. So we also see the fast and efficient returns processing on the NPP, and that's part of the piece that we see as being really critical in terms of the role that we can play and the NPP can play in implementing and moving towards implementing payday super. When we've looked at the flows that the NPP can add value, and there are a couple more here, we've highlighted some of the contribution flows, rollover flows, and also payout that play a critical part in the superannuation flow. And it's really important that we focus on making sure that they all run smoothly. We don't want to impact at any point in the payment flow or the contributions flow any of these processes, so that we can ensure that ultimately the funds, the administrators and the clearinghouses are actually processing all of these payments. In terms of next steps and what we're actually doing for the NPP and looking at what we've been doing over the last couple of years, we're just building on the work that we have been doing. We're looking at our work with D-SPANs. We're also, deep diving into a number of things that really focus on payday super stream changes. We're working really closely to identify, including, focused SMEs from our organisation being involved in a number of the ATO workshops. We're really targeting ensuring that we have a clear message on the challenges that are being faced by the superannuation industry in terms of reconciliation and by funds. And we want to make sure that that's really transparent across the board. So from our perspective, what can you do now? And what's your call to action, I would say? Talk to your bank or your payment service provider about how you can either prepare for payday, but think about more broadly, not just payday super. How can you actually get the efficiencies from the whole of the NPP offering? And really, that adds to the fact that where you're processing certain things, they're usually aligned to other business processes. And that's why we think there's a real opportunity to align some of those things with payroll and also, other finance processes that are commonly performed every day. We need to make sure that we're covering all of those things as part of this review and taking a real step back and looking at the end user processes.
Thanks, Marnie. So we just wanted to open up now to our panel discussion and talk a little bit more about the NPP and the role that it can play in superannuation payments. So Grant, I'm going to start with you. In your role, you're obviously talking a lot to your corporate customers. Mm-hmm. What are some of the kind of key benefits that they are seeing when they think about changes to their superannuation payments?
Yeah, thank you. So I think what's pretty key here is that, as a business, I manage a business that looks after digital sort of payables and receivables solutions across a number of industries, and we've got the great privilege to talk to customers of all industries and sizes. And what we're seeing is that increasingly they're wanting to talk about how we could help them achieve sort of what we call a real-time advantage. So how do we help them transform their business where faster payments are a key enabler of that? And I think the rate of this has certainly been an increased consideration in the last couple of years. And I think it's probably important to note that the new payments platform is no longer new. No. Okay, so it's been around for a few years, and so I think as individuals, it's no longer scary. It's no longer new, and you're already seeing in your day-to-day life. You're already making splitting a restaurant bill, and you're seeing that you can do that in fast payments immediately, and saying so. Our clients are saying, well, I can do this in my sort of own life. How do I do this in my business, and how do I get this into a business context? And so, in the super industry, it's no different. And I know I don't look that old, but I'm going to talk about the bad old days. So I can remember the bad old days of cheques. So we were sending out thousands and thousands of cheques, and Mercer would have been recipient of some of those. And this was a time when, prior to SuperStream, there was cheques going out left, right, and centre. And it was, SuperStream essentially revolutionised that by able to take a situation where we had paper and delays and turn it into a fully electronic data and payment standard is amazing. And it was an amazing transformation. And I can still remember the excitement of turning off those last cheques and doing the first electronic payment and data message via SuperStream. Yeah. And I know it's not sort of Red Bull sort of base jumping type excitement, but I work in IT, I work for a bank, and it's in super, right? So you get the excitement where you can get it. Yeah. That's right. So, but I look at that and say, well, that was over 10 years ago. And so we're now in a position where you look at that and say, with the payday super and all these other sort of expectations and BECs, we can talk about those. We know that there are delays in the process that are now unnecessary based on current technology. So they were appropriate for when SuperStream was first implemented, but they're no longer appropriate. Yeah. And so, my view is that we can do better. And so our customers are understanding that as well. I think the key thing is that, from a funds perspective, the objective of a fund is really it's that core promise, which is, I'm going to look after the best financial interests of the member. And so in that regard, there's probably no better way of, or more obvious way than being able to receive and invest member money quicker. So we want to see that happen, and acknowledging there's lots of challenges and the like, but that's where the industry is heading, and that's where our customers are also looking towards direction of how to get there. And as part of that, you're also looking for, how do you make your processing more efficient? So changing to more efficient processing and ultimately the employer experience. If an employer under Payday Super is going to be doing something more regularly, that needs to be a much better experience for them.
So maybe we're about to see the next wave of revolution coming for superannuation payments.
Yeah, look, maybe it's too early to call it SuperStream 2.0, but we should always see this as a journey we should continue always to push forward on.
And so, Gay, from your perspective, what do you kind of see as the opportunities and the benefits of real-time payments when you think about that from a fund perspective and also for members and employers?
Yeah, look, I think, great, you covered it quite well. When we think about what superannuation is meant to achieve, and every working Australian actually has a superannuation account, and it's really to ensure that people have got great retirement savings for them to retire on. So the sooner we can get the money in and invest that for people, the quicker the magic of compound interest actually takes effect. So, rather than having a quarterly payment, which we have done in the past, bringing that to be aligned with paydays, I think we'll really see that move quite dramatically. And that will, as we're on the eve of International Women's Day and the WGEA gender pay gap information coming out, we've done research as well about the gender retirement gap. So these small changes will make big impacts for different workers across the spectrum who will actually have that benefit of compound interest for a lot longer. I think the other benefit for individuals is really around education. So individuals now waiting to see their super hit their account. It's a 3-month window, and we know that superannuation sometimes isn't the first thing on people's minds. And if you miss that, you forget to look at it. So we know that in 2022 we had 200,000 Australians who didn't get their superannuation payments, and another 500,000 that had late payments. So checking on that will be far more real time when that's actually with my pay slip and the money's going into my account. So people can plan and actually use the calculators that we have online around our super funds to start to track and see where they're going to go for their super.
Can remember their passwords to log in.
Well, that's the other thing. Well, if they're doing it more regularly,
Yes,
Marnie,
exactly.
hopefully they will.
Yeah, and I think sometimes that kind of friction gets kind of underestimated in terms of the time it can take for people to then follow up and think about it, but then the manual effort to then investigate that and understand what the situation is.
That's right. Yeah.
So certainly real-time payments I think can really help to deliver from a member experience perspective. And so, Grant, from a Westpac perspective, how are you kind of working with your customers to get ready for these changes, and what's the role that Westpac's playing?
Yeah, so clearly, Westpac is unique in that we're a bank, but we also have a superannuation clearinghouse and gateway. And as we've mentioned, outside of Quick Super, we're already heavily involved in NPP payments. So our payables solutions are already making real-time payments using a pay ID, and our receivables, we've already got Pay2 involved. So I guess from that perspective, it means that we've got that unique positioning that we have a great understanding of superannuation processing requirements. There's a part of my brain which is still embedded with the message implementation guidelines of super streams. I still remember that. I forget people's names. But we know about superannuation in great detail. We know about payday and the potential impacts of that, and noticing that will have positive impacts on member, but also more obligations on employers.
Yeah.
And to take that and also understanding the NPP capabilities extremely well means that we're not reliant on third parties to understand and put all this together. And it puts us really a responsibility, similar to how we felt in SuperStream, in that you're ultimately trying to get the best outcome for all participants. I'm a member of a super fund. I want my money to be worked as well as it can be. And so we're ideally looking for the best outcome for all Australians in that regards, and the multitude of employers that will be affected by this as well. And so being able to put all these things together means that you can actually give strong guidance in terms of how the standard could be moved and how payday could actually best be delivered. So I'll just go through some of the possibilities, just to cover these off. So things like direct debit. So direct debit under a clearinghouse currently takes 3 business days to clear. So the money is from the employer to the super fund is at least 3 days. Imagine that change where if we could do end-to-end through NPP, where it can go end-to-end from the employer to the super fund on the same day.
Yeah.
So, and that same day means that your process is taking minutes and not days. And you consider weekends, adding a couple of days to a weekend, you're talking about 5 calendar days. So it's a massive change in terms of the process. Thinking about the fund side, so the funds that today all pick up a bank statement in the morning, and they do a very large batch process where they're matching payments with data, And that process starts on the next business day.
Yeah.
So instead, and it only runs probably on business days, instead you can go to an event-based trigger where as soon as the payment comes into your bank account, the fund can know about it and start actioning. So it means that there's a tremendous improvement in that service level that you can provide not just to your members, but also to the employers that are submitting those. And I also did some research. So I did some research. Yeah, that's right. So I did some research around employers and looking at what type of the times that they're doing work. So looked at our stats and said that over 20% of employers are actually doing things after 6 p.m. or on weekends. So 1 in 5 are doing stuff outside of hours. And the probably no surprise is that probably 90% of those are small business, so less than 20 or less employees. So the advantage of NPP is not just about same day, it's about the 24/7. There's no more cut-off times. So if you want to do it on a Saturday night, you can do that. So I think those type of things are really important to understand and to then be able to say these are not things out there in the future. These are things which progressively are being delivered and are available. It's no longer a new payments platform, it's a current one. So you get a situation now where, if I can give an example, someone's running their restaurant on a Friday night, they're doing their payments. They could do an end-to-end from the employer to the fund. The fund could then process that, and potentially one of the funds might have discovered that there's a member that they can't match. They can actually return that money in real time. That's a process that currently takes days or weeks. And it can be taken, before they've even finished. I was going to say they were drinking a coffee, but it's Friday night, probably something stronger. So, in that regard, before they've even finished their drink, they've actually got back the feedback and they know that there's a problem they need to solve.
And then it can be rectified as well.
And it can be rectified. Maybe they've got a change of fund form, they haven't, they've been busy running their business, they forgot to apply that. So all things that, as I said, it is literally weeks for many cases for this, and that's just not acceptable under payday. You don't want a situation where they're already making the next lot of contributions by the time they get the feedback on the previous one.
And I think that's really been important for us to make sure that when those error messages, making sure that we've actually got in the payment response or with the that we're aligned between the two messages. It's not just a matter of us saying, okay, we're receiving that payment response back and it's failed. There needs to be a correlation between why it's failed, and that I think is really critical work that we've been doing as part of the Payday Super assessment as well, just to see, is there anything that we can add to a payment message that would actually help reconcile for those small businesses and help them actually process more smoothly when they're receiving those contributions files.
And let's maybe kind of expand a little bit on that in terms of what that kind of future could look like and the sort of the North Star maybe that we're trying to work towards. So, Gay, from your perspective, what would you kind of like to see is kind of the future of superannuation payments? What's important from a kind of sort of fund perspective?
Yeah, look, certainly getting them quickly is really important. So if we can get those through, I think, Grant, you talked about some of the downstream effects, the downstream effects of having the electronic payments being moved really quickly through the system is going to be really helpful. And Marnie, I loved hearing that, some real-time feedback on potentially returned payments. So the quicker we can move things through the system is going to be more and more important. So I think that's really the focus, which I know is the focus of the legislation. I know we're still waiting on some of the details, and with the looming election, that's probably going to be pushed out a little bit. I know our actuaries are all chomping at the bit and working with the ATO and trying to find out how we're going to do that the best. But I think most people have got the intent in the right space, and it's great to hear that different parties in the stream are thinking about how do we actually make it easier for each other as we go through this, because at the end of the day we're actually going to be doing the right thing by our members and having our members' best interests at heart.
Absolutely. And so let's kind of talk about sort of some of the practical steps in terms of how kind of organisations can start to think about what this means for them. So for a business or a fund that's starting to think about real-time superannuation payments, What's your kind of recommendation, Grant, in terms of how do they sort of start that journey? Where should they sort of focus their attention?
Okay, well, I guess they're watching the webinar, so that's the first part, right? So I think, and not just joking, I think, there'll be people here that are, aligned and excited about things. There'll be some that are fearful or uncertain. And so I think the key thing is that you need to be informed. So being informed about the changes and possibilities is really important because without that you will really struggle, I guess, to be able to make the changes that are required. Because I think, regardless if we've got payday super, which obviously is legislation which is driving employer behaviour, but to an end, if whether or not that occurs or not, we still want to drive changes that are of benefit to members and employers anyway, right? So, but if that isn't enough of an incentive, you also have the BEX closure. So that means what we know as direct debits and credits won't operate. NPP will be the payment method of choice from 2030. So, from my perspective, you either want to plan to the changes to get ultimate benefit, or you have change thrust upon you. So I'm not a change thrust upon me type of person. I would rather be in a position where you say, okay, well, this is what is happening, and it is of benefit. So how do we move with that? And we've got to. I think everyone has time to be able to make moves, and those moves. I'll go through some of the examples probably to sort of crystallise those, but. I think the key thing is that we all know as well that our members and employers are all using, they're splitting the restaurant bills. They all know what's happening. They know real-time payments can happen.
Yeah.
And so therefore they're expecting this. So some of the real things that you can do, if you're using a clearinghouse, so there's sort of two legs with that. So there's the employer to the clearinghouse and the clearinghouse to the fund. So as we're doing with our Quick Super Clearinghouse, that first leg is our priority, because you can get a lot of the benefit for employers without changing the second leg. So funds love that because they say, right, we're going to get benefit, but we don't have to change anything right now. We can plan those changes out. And so that's certainly one of the key pieces there. And you can pilot these. So the key thing with all of these real-time payments is that you don't have to turn a switch and move from one to the other. What you can do is introduce it in a pilot fashion, in a progressive way, work through the challenges, work out if anything's not 100%, fix those and improve it before you scale that up. Certainly, looking at the super funds, on that second leg side in particular, all the super funds use some form of registry system, whether it is a commercial product or something they've built in-house, and that registry system needs to be retooled or re-architected to be able to handle real-time payments. So that's something to be thinking about early, because it might be a larger exercise. And so my advice is start thinking about that not as a compliance change, think of it as an opportunity. Because it is a big opportunity, but you need to think about it. So how do you get the most benefit of any investment in that? And that goes through not just receiving the payments, but also, as we talked about, the returning of payments. So if you can do that fully automated, I heard someone recently talk about the best customer experience their customers could ever have is they don't talk to us. So I'm not sure entirely, but that's what a super fund would like. But the customers go, well, they're generally only calling when they need help with something or something's gone wrong. So what you're looking for is that you give them an experience so that they can do everything at the time of their choosing. So if they're a small business, one of those small business owners, doing something late at night on a weekend, you're still able to service them without having to have call centres and the like.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So, and then I think the final sort of bit is like a simple thing like your bank statement. So a lot of businesses would have bank statements which are still from the dark ages of banking, which only have, a narrative and amount and a tran code probably or something like that. So there are bank statements, every bank would have them. Westpac's had one for years that would have more rich information, which is essentially NPP ready. So look, even if you were to start off with that as a first step on a super fund side, is get that from your bank, make sure you can start bringing that in. Even if you're not receiving real-time payments or using them in any in terms of a process change, think about that as being a dependency to be able to move to that. So move to that as soon as possible. So I think those type of things are great things, and then also think of other opportunities, as we mentioned about the payouts to members. It will be possible this year to do a confirmation payee check via an API to check that the person that you're about to pay $200,000 to is actually who they say they are, and that account is theirs. So that's a huge change to give me your account name, I'll put it in, but
just
no bank actually checks that, right? So it's a huge advantage to be able to do that, and then do a real-time payment. So you're not introducing fraud. You're introducing a fraud check that gives you greater confidence that real-time payment can be delivered without there being issues.
That's right. And in today's environment, having that assurance is huge, I think, in terms of making sure that you're paying the right person.
Yep.
So
it's been really interesting, Grant, when we've been having conversations with industry. One of the pieces of homework that I've sort of said to them is, are you actually receiving NPP payments now? And it's seamless. You don't even realise that you're receiving them. And that, I think, is really interesting to see, because we're actually... as part of this evolution and part of the fact that some businesses are actually making their payments late at night, that means that they may be going on NPP.
Yep.
But that the businesses or the funds receiving it don't even realise, because it is actually going to the same spot, they're reconciling it in the same way.
Yep.
And it's unearthing and educating to make sure that we've got the challenges that we need to identify really out in the open, and that we're all addressing them as an industry, not just sitting back and sort of saying, okay, that's a problem with your bank. We actually need to look at it more broadly and say, they are the statement files. So it's this issue that we're actually addressing here, and here's a broader conversation as the industry that we actually know these are the hotspots we need to address, and how we actually do that. And I think that's probably the next step for us, is how do we educate on those little pieces that are fundamental to how we actually process everything.
And just a final point on that is that we're not talking about wholesale changes here to the SuperStream standard, for example. We've got a two-horse race at the moment between data and payments, and data's winning. So what you want to do is get them to travel at a similar speed, so that the actual processing of the two can be done together.
Exactly. Yeah.
So we're talking about changes to payment processing, not the data. The data is still fit for purpose largely, and so therefore it isn't. I've used SuperStream 2.0 earlier. It shouldn't have the investment spend of SuperStream 1.0, right? So it costs a lot of money to do that, and the benefits are there, but I don't think this is going to have the same significance in terms of investment spend.
Yeah.
And Gabe, from your perspective, what sort of advice do you have for organisations to start thinking about the change and getting ready for that?
So I think I'd just really like to amplify one of Marnie's points that she had earlier around preparing and thinking about your payroll and aligning processes. So with super, so there is a myriad of payroll issues that have been, in the media. We've seen lots of underpayment issues coming around, and superannuation is paid on a lot of payments that go through payroll. So overtime, allowances, bonuses, other pieces that go through your own ecosystem as you think about this from an organisational perspective. So starting to align those and understand when the payment actually happens, and then how you actually put that through, because that will also impact some other changes, because we love a continually maturing superannuation system. So there are other changes that are down the track around the $3 million tax cap, for example, that are potentially coming through. And there'll be other things as well. So getting ahead and making sure you've got a really clear system and you're understanding that. There are going to be some complexities if you've got defined benefits inside your system as well as the maximum contribution caps. So the maximum contribution caps are calculated quarterly. And then if you're on a fortnightly pay cycle and you're paying super fortnightly, how are you actually going to manage that through with your payroll? So I think understanding and getting ahead of that, documenting your rules and making sure you're working with your payroll providers to get that together will be really important. And then probably the obvious one, especially for smaller businesses and also large businesses, I think as well, is just the cash flow implications. So when you've been paying super quarterly and paying it 4 times a year, if you're a fortnightly payroll organisation, you're going to be having 26 payments over the year, and you'll be bringing forward those superannuation payments. So how do you actually budget and cash flow for those in your business? They're going to be really important things to think about. So I'd really encourage people to think about documentation of what they're doing and how they're doing, and actually walking through the process.
Definitely. And we might move to questions from the audience, because we've had a number come through. So, but just building on one question that came through, and I think building on some of your points, Gaze, Marnie, this is for you. From a AP Plus perspective, what are we doing to work with, the banks and payroll providers and other people in the ecosystem to get ready for Payday Super?
Yeah, and this is probably one of my pets. Really, really active in talking to DSPs, and obviously the ATO. We've been working with the data standards team and the SuperStream team for a number of years, probably more than we care to talk about, because we actually do need to involve everyone, and that's the key for us. We need all end users. We need the payroll providers, because we can't just rely on payments processing. It does actually have to align with existing processes, and so part of that is working through with DSPs, with payroll providers, with the ATO, to deep dive into the end-to-end flows, and actually understanding how those processes align. If you're waiting for to your point, Grant, around making sure that the payment's going through and you know that it's going to go through at a certain time, actually sometimes the blocker is that the approver's out at lunch and we can't make sure that, they're not approving the payroll for that day. And so there's some dependencies that you need to sort of understand that we know aren't necessarily a consideration for a service provider or for the teams actually building the technology. But they are part of the processes that we actually need to understand as well, because they could be some of the blockers. And for us, that's really important. It's the end-to-end process to understand the end users, but also then on the flip side of it, what do the funds need to do once they receive it, or what does the clearinghouse need to do to understand that they've got all of the information and the timeliness of it. That's the other piece that I think that when we start looking at how long certain processes take, if they can be improved, then maybe those pieces of improvement are smaller pieces within the middle and don't require huge change. But when you take a step back and look at it from the whole sort of journey, it actually looks like a big change. And so it is, to Gay's point, taking the piecemeal sort of approach, looking at the changes that we can make now, process changes, not necessary technical changes, and really getting efficiencies out of that.
So really about the kind of sequencing and kind
Correct.
of taking a bit of a test and a learn approach as well as you think about that. So.
And that's what we are actually seeing, Grant sort of talking about what's coming. We're also seeing a huge amount of interest from the rest of the industry as well. Watch this space. There are a number of things that will probably come out in the next couple of months around what we're seeing in terms of progress. But we've seen some of the message exchange sort of partners and part of the gateways already involved in some of the processing and really taking a step into how they actually look at combining NPP and payments as well.
Thanks, Marnie. So let's talk about the kind of elephant in the room around Payday Super, shall we? And there's been a question come in about this in terms of, draft legislation is due by sort of the end of February. Election kind of on the horizon, is the clock ticking, we're running out of time. So it seems unlikely that, legislation will get passed before that happens. But does that change any of the objectives in terms of how we kind of, push forward to real-time super?
So in my opinion, I guess the Payday Super changes the employer obligations in that the employers won't be expected to move away from quarterly submissions. But it doesn't take away the other benefits and acknowledgements that the current technology that is in use is not as good as the options available. So we can still achieve employer benefit, member benefit in line with continuing on faster payments. So my opinion is that it probably just reduces, I guess, the risk to funds in how to do that, because they know that this is something that they have more time to think about how they would do that. But it shouldn't change their desire to do this. Certainly on the fund side, it doesn't change our desire to continue in this as a service provider to both employers and funds, because I see that you can never, by choosing the right path, you can never be in the wrong in that regard. So I think this is the right thing to do by all participants to drive those faster payments. If the legislation is really just a guardrail to say this is what you have to do, I think we should be choosing what we should be doing.
Yeah. And from our point of view, this is a continuation of a conversation that we've been having for a number of years. We know that, we've been working with the ATO to have NPP as an approved payment method within SuperStream, and that's something that, has been an objective for a number of years. And those things are really important now, not just because of payday, but because we need to look to 2030, we need to look to innovations, and we also need to solve some of the problems that we're seeing and the issues that actually are being experienced by the industry. And we're not solving them all from just a payments perspective, but we're solving them together, and the analysis of those processes and complementing each other in terms of how we match contributions files and other processes are actually really important, and we can't just stop if this legislation, obviously is delayed a little bit, but yeah, we need to keep moving.
And we've been talking a little bit about that too, just around what the legislation will look like and what the responsibilities are for the trustee and for the employer, and how that will actually play out. And if we're looking at a 2026 implementation date without a lot of guardrails around what this means, and with 7 and 3 day time limits to get things done, and increased ATO scrutiny over this, what does that actually mean for a transition period? So some of the things we've actually been debating internally is just around, if it's going to be much more squished in terms of getting the legislation for go live, do we have a bit more time around just giving us some guardrails that aren't as strict originally to get us through and get the intent right, so that we're actually doing that and then move forward. So I think getting as soon as we can get the detail, that will, I think, alleviate a lot of people's concerns.
Yep. But the message is keep pushing forward and working on that revolution that we talked about earlier. Yep. So Marnie, another question for you, because specifically in relation to the NPP. So is the NPP going to be able to handle all of the volume of payments that are required for payday super, given sort of where the platform is today? Yeah,
our headroom, and I've sort of said this to the industry quite a bit, our capacity and the headroom on the NPP can cater at the moment for 50% of the direct entry volume, and our capacity and our capability uplifts will be ongoing, to always deal with that ability. I think there has been some concerns raised around the nature of bulk payments or batch payments, but to Grant's point, there's an evolution that's going to happen in how we actually need to deal with payments as a whole and these messages coming through. I think you will see them go to smaller sizes because we're actually dealing with the need for an instant response, and people expect that instant response and that verification and validation. So I don't necessarily think that that will be the way of the future, that the whole batch sort of process, especially in this space where you're looking for a real-time response and there's the immediacy of that. However, we are looking to solve for batch or bulk payments across our infrastructure. That will solve the processing of those files between financial institutions. We already currently see, and Westpac is one of those examples, where bulk files are sent in and processed now. You're debulking them, they've got this ability now to already process those files and send them across the NPP without any issues. We don't really see the volume of superannuation payments are sort of part of a bigger pool, I would say, of what we are currently facing in terms of the payments that we need to process on the NPP. And we are looking forward to accepting those payments and being able to process them with existing and uplifts that we're dealing with in capacity.
So bring it on.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. I think we've run out of time, unfortunately, to get it to any more questions. But I'd really like to thank all of my panellists today. Thank you to Gay and to Grant and to Marnie. I think it's very exciting to see the journey that we are on and how collectively as an industry we can move forward to see what the next sort of generation of superannuation payments looks like. Thank you everyone for joining us today. Apologies if we didn't get a time to cover your question. We'll aim to follow up post the webinar to see if we can address any questions that we didn't manage to get to today. So thank you everyone.